My name is Gideon Wade. After 27 years building the foundation of Brightwell Systems, I was fired by the founder's son, 30 minutes into his first day as CEO. No warning. No thank you. Just erased. I felt humiliated, disposable. But that moment broke something and rebuilt something stronger. I didn't just walk away. I stood tall and left with my dignity. That day I chose myself. If this story feels like yours, stay with me until the end. I promise, it's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming who you are. Then, tell me in the comments, was I right to leave? Or should I have stayed and fought longer? I truly value your advice. It happened on a Monday morning. The kind where the air felt heavy even though the sky was clear, and the breeze wasn't sharp enough to bother anyone. It wasn't the kind of day that warned you about anything. But something in my chest tightened the moment I pulled into the lot. The parking spot I'd used for nearly 2 decades was still there, third from the loading bay. My keycard still beeped the same tone. The front desk still had the fake smile girl, Melissa, pretending she hadn't already heard the gossip flying through the upper floors. Inside, the halls of Brightwell Systems looked the same as they always had. Beige walls, a hint of burnt coffee hanging near the break room. Half-dead potted plants. No one had moved since we opened this office in '08. I walked past all of it, the same way I had every morning for 27 years, my left hand in my coat pocket, right hand holding a coffee thermos with my name scratched on the bottom. Routine keeps a man sane. Or at least, it makes you feel like things still belong to you. But that morning, something was off. Not in the loud way. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. It was in the quiet. The way folks looked up too fast when you walked by. The way people smiled but didn't really see you. There was a tightness in the building. Like the walls were waiting for something to crack. I got to my floor, product development, and paused by my office door, hand resting on the knob. The plaque still said Director of Product Strategy. I'd carried that title longer than Brent Halberd had carried a real job. I remember looking through the glass wall. My desk was still there, papers neat the way I left them on Friday. A little plastic award from 16 sat on the shelf, half faded. Innovator of the Year. It used to mean something. Back when the old man ran things. Before I could turn the handle, Denise, our team assistant, walked up. She didn't make eye contact. Brent wants to see you upstairs, she said, voice low, almost ashamed. I blinked. Now, he said right now. No good morning. No how was your weekend? Just a message. Like I'd been summoned. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded, left the thermos on my desk, and took the elevator up to the 10th floor. That's where the real decisions got made. Or at least, that's what the new guard believed. The boardroom smelled like new money and anxiety. Leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows, bottled water labels, turned out just right. Brent was already sitting there, head of a table, posture too confident for a guy who'd been handed everything. 3 others sat beside him, all from departments I used to collaborate with. None of them looked at me. Brent didn't offer a handshake. He didn't ask me to sit. He just said, we need to make a clean slate. This legacy stuff, it's not working anymore. That was it. 11 words. No build-up. No thanks. Not even a false smile. I waited a beat, thinking he'd follow it with something more human. Maybe a we appreciate your contributions, or this is difficult for me too. But there was nothing. I looked at the faces in the room. Not one flinched. Not one leaned forward. It was like they'd rehearsed this scene and knew exactly how long to hold their silence. So I gave them what they wanted. I nodded once. Not fast, not slow. Just enough. I remember my throat felt dry, but I wouldn't ask for water. Wouldn't give Brent the satisfaction. I turned and walked out. No raised voice. No parting shot. Just silence. The hallway felt colder than when I'd walked in. Or maybe it was me who changed. I passed the glass office I'd built up over 2 decades. My name still on the door. My jacket still hanging over the chair. But I didn't stop. Didn't look back. Some things, when they break quiet. I reached the elevator, pressed the button, and felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. Not just the job, not really. It was the years. The time. The belief that if you gave your best, people would notice. That legacy counted for something. I stepped inside the elevator alone. As the doors closed, I caught a last glimpse of the hallway behind me. Polished floors, soft lighting, sterile silence. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I touched the door handle to my office. And somehow, it felt like I'd already said goodbye. Looking back now, I probably should have spoken up that day in the strategy meeting. It was a few weeks before the Monday everything fell apart. I remember the way Brent sat there, arms folded, jaw clenched just enough to look like he was thinking hard. But he wasn't thinking. He was waiting for the chance to interrupt. He didn't even try to hide it. Halfway through one of the engineering leads explaining the legacy system updates, Brent cut in. This whole framework is bloated. We're patching something that should have been rebuilt 10 years ago. The room went quiet for a second. Nobody challenged him. Not because he was right, but because nobody knew how to argue with someone who hadn't earned the seat he was sitting in. I kept my eyes on the slides, acting like I hadn't heard the arrogance drip from his voice. I'd seen that tone before, just not from someone that young. Brent always had something to prove. And somehow, it always came at the cost of someone else's work. I wanted to believe he just needed time, that he'd settle in, that the pressure of filling his father's shoes would humble him. But the truth was, the more power he got, the more he wanted everyone before him to disappear. That day, after the meeting ended, I stayed behind to shut off the projector. Brent didn't offer a word, just walked out first. Like the rest of us, we're lucky to be breathing his air. I should have said something then. I should have pulled him aside, reminded him that leadership wasn't about torching the ground behind you. But I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place. Told myself maybe I was overreacting. What I didn't tell myself, but probably should have, was that I was scared. Not the kind of fear that makes you tremble. The kind that makes you second-guess whether your years of experience still matter in rooms filled with people who think faster means better. I'd spent my whole career trying to build things that lasted. Brent wanted to build things that looked good on a press release. And somewhere deep down, I had started to wonder if maybe I'd already had my run. Maybe I was the only one still pretending legacy mattered. The Friday after that meeting, I met up with Elijah at Morning Grace. He was already sitting in the corner booth, same one as always. I never asked if he picked it for the view or the habit. He gave me that nod, slow, steady. The kind of greeting from someone who knows you don't want to talk about work, but also knows you're going to anyway. Elijah, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. You ever regret leaving? He smiled, stirred his coffee, then said, not for a second. But I hated how long it took me to walk out. He had retired 3 years ago, after spending nearly 2 decades as CFO. But everyone knew the truth. He hadn't retired. He'd been pushed out quietly, framed as a strategic transition, when really, the board just wanted someone flashier. You remember Brent in meetings back then? I asked. Elijah nodded. Used to sit in with his dad, sometimes. Didn't say much, but he was always taking notes like he had a plan. He's got more than a plan now, I muttered. He's got control. There was a pause, long enough for the hum of the espresso machine to fill the air between us. Elijah leaned back. He's already moved against 3 department heads, all over 50, all gone in the last quarter. I looked at him. You didn't know, he asked. No, I said quietly. He's not building a team, Elijah said. He's pruning a generation. That hit harder than I expected. I didn't ask how Elijah knew. He always had his ear to the ground. You think I'm next? I asked. I think, Elijah said, you've been next for a while. You just didn't want to believe it. He wasn't cruel when he said it. Just honest. Like someone who'd seen enough men stay too long in places that stopped valuing them. I sat back, let the words sink in. I thought about my office, my team, the long hours, the weekends, the product launches where I was the last one out of the building. And suddenly, all of it felt vulnerable. Like it could be erased with one decision. You can either fight to stay in a room that doesn't want you, Elijah said, gently, or walk out with your head high. I didn't have a response for that, because part of me still believed I could fix it. That staying meant I was loyal. that I had one more contribution left in me. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, was that loyalty had stopped being mutual a long time ago. And Brent? He'd been making his move before I even realized the pieces were shifting. The week after that coffee with Elijah, things moved faster than I could have imagined. It felt like Brent had waited just long enough for his father's office to get cleared out before storming in with a whiteboard full of buzzwords and a plan to turn the company inside out. He called a leadership meeting on Wednesday. Everyone was there, department heads, a couple of senior engineers, 2 new faces I didn't recognize. People were dressed sharper than usual, like they could smell change in the air and didn't want to look out of place when it arrived. Brent stood at the head of the room, sleeves rolled up, blazer off, like he was trying to be one of us, but also above us. The kind of casual that says, I don't need to try, I already own the room. He clicked the remote, and the first slide hit the screen. Halberd 2.0. I already didn't like where it was going. He talked fast, slides full of AI integration, blockchain expansion, predictive supply systems. We're not just updating tools, he said, pacing. We're redesigning the soul of the company. Traditional systems can't keep up with today's velocity. We need to pivot now. I waited for someone to ask how we'd pull this off with the current infrastructure. No one did. When he started talking about sunsetting our legacy platforms, the very systems I'd spent the last decade refining, I finally raised my hand. I didn't want to cause a scene. I just needed clarity. Brent, I said calmly, some of these platforms you're proposing to replace are still responsible for over half of our current revenue. Have we validated that the new framework can handle that scale? He didn't even blink. That's old thinking, Gideon. We're not stuck in 1999 anymore. He chuckled when he said it like it was a joke. Like I'd just embarrassed myself by speaking up. I glanced around the table, expecting a glance, a nod, anything. But no one looked at me. Eyes went to notepads, phones, down at the table. Not because they agreed with him, but because they didn't want to be next. That silence did something to me. I wasn't angry. Not yet. It was worse. I felt erased. Like the years I'd given, the products I'd helped launch, the fires I'd put out over holidays and weekends. None of it mattered. Not anymore. The meeting went on another 40 minutes. I stayed quiet. My name didn't come up again. That afternoon, I went back to my office and closed the door, not because I needed to work, but because I didn't want to be seen. I sat there for almost an hour, just staring out the window at the parking lot. The truth hit me hard in that quiet. I wasn't staying at the company out of loyalty anymore. I was staying because I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to walk away without a fight. Afraid that leaving would make it seem like I'd given up, or worse, like Brent had been right all along. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the real blow came. One of our biggest clients, Parkfield Freight, called me directly. I'd worked with them since their startup days. Their head of operations, Monica, didn't waste time. Gideon, she said, this new rollout, it's not working. The data sync is glitching. Their warehouse teams can't process half the shipments. What's going on? I blinked. I'm sorry, Monica. I wasn't involved with the release. You weren't. She sounded stunned. Then who signed off on this? I told her what little I knew, promised I'd follow up, though I already had a sinking feeling I wouldn't get the answers. Sure enough, Brent called an emergency meeting later that day. Everyone crammed into the boardroom. He stood at the front, arms crossed. We have a situation with Parkfield, he said. There were some breakdowns in system communication that should have been caught during QA. He turned toward my end of the table. The product team owns this. I opened my mouth, just barely, but he cut me off with a raised hand. We'll take it offline. Which, of course, meant don't argue. Don't defend. Just take the blame. My heart was pounding, but I said nothing. The room was watching. I could feel the weight of their eyes, but not one of them would meet mine. After the meeting, I sat in my car. Didn't start it. Didn't even reach for the keys. I just stared at the dashboard. 27 years. That's how long I'd given this place. I'd built systems that held the company together during recessions, pandemics, buyouts. I trained half the team sitting in that room today. And yet, there I was, cast aside like some relic. Disposable. Convenient. I sat in that parking lot and didn't want to walk back inside. That Thursday, I drove without thinking. I left the office around 5, didn't head home, didn't stop at Morning Grace. I just drove past the freeway, over the hill toward the east side of town, where the streets were quieter and the buildings didn't try to impress anyone. I ended up in the parking lot of a small church with red bricks and a wooden steeple. I hadn't been there in years. There wasn't a service going on. No music, no choir practice, not even a cleaning crew. Just stillness. That kind of heavy silence that makes you feel like the walls are listening. I sat in the back pew, same row where my wife and I used to sit when the kids were little. It felt smaller now. Or maybe I'd just gotten heavier with time, heavier with everything I'd been carrying around these last few months. I didn't pray out loud, didn't close my eyes. I just stared at the stained glass in front of me, watched the sunlight trying to sneak through the cracks. I wasn't asking for a miracle, just an answer, or something that would feel like one. About 20 minutes in, a young guy, maybe early 20s, walked by. He wore a janitor's shirt, had earbuds half dangling from his collar. He stopped when he saw me and nodded politely. "Sir," he said, not intrusive, just acknowledging I was there. I nodded back. He hesitated, then asked, "You come here often?" "Used to," I said. "First time in a while." He smiled, kind of crooked, like he wasn't sure if he'd overstepped. "Well," he said, glancing at the front of the church, "maybe you're here now, because you're not supposed to keep carrying it alone." Then he just kept walking, pushed open the side door, and disappeared into the back hallway. That line stuck with me. Not supposed to carry it alone. I didn't realize how tired I was. Not physically, spiritually, mentally. I'd been trying to hold the entire history of the company on my back, trying to prove that experience still counted, that wisdom still mattered, that I mattered. And in the process, I'd made myself invisible. I stayed in that pew another 10 minutes, then finally stood up, stretched my legs, and walked outside. The air had cooled, sun dipping low behind the trees. I stood there for a minute longer, then called Elijah. He picked up on the second ring. "Still holding the line?" he asked, like he'd been expecting the call. "Not sure what I'm holding anymore," I said. "Feels like I'm clinging to a story that already ended." There was a pause. Elijah wasn't a man to fill silence unless it needed filling. "You know," he said, "when they removed me from the board, I thought my whole identity went with the title. I spent 6 months angry, and another 6 pretending I wasn't." I leaned against the hood of my car. "So what changed?" He chuckled. "I stopped thinking I had to prove I was valuable to people who'd already decided I wasn't. I didn't say anything. I started volunteering," he went on. "Then consulting part-time. Somewhere in between, I remembered who I was, without the office, without the email signature. And I was still me, maybe even a better version." I looked out toward the street. A kid rode by on a bike, no hands on the bars, backpack bouncing. The kind of freedom you forget is even possible once you've signed your first mortgage. "You ever think leaving meant letting them win?" I asked. Elijah didn't answer right away. Only when I thought winning meant staying. "But what if it doesn't?" That landed, harder than I expected. I looked back toward the church. That little building hadn't changed in a decade, but I had. And the truth was, I wasn't staying at Brightwell Systems out of loyalty anymore. I was staying because I was afraid. Afraid that walking away would erase everything I'd built. Afraid that the years I gave would vanish the moment I stopped showing up. That my name would disappear from meeting notes, email chains, plaques on the wall. Like I'd never been there at all. Then Elijah said something else, soft, almost like he wasn't sure I needed to hear it. "By the way, I got a call from Fairlight Group last week. They're looking for someone to head up product strategy. They asked if I knew anybody." I didn't breathe for a second. "You told them?" "I told them you were too loyal to realize your chapter there was already over. But that, if they waited a week, you might figure it out for yourself." I smiled. First time all day. As I slid into the driver's seat, I looked back at the church one more time. Nothing about it had changed, but I had. I wasn't afraid to leave. I was afraid no one would remember I was here. Monday came with a storm. Not outside. The skies were clear, but inside the building you could feel it. A tension in the air, like static before a lightning strike. Phones were ringing more than usual. People whispered in hallways with the kind of urgency that only comes when something's gone terribly wrong. By 9:15, an all-hands emergency meeting was called. We were told to report to the 10th floor conference room. No agenda. No prep. Just a one-line email from Brent's assistant. Critical meeting, product and executive leadership only. I walked in and saw the screens already lit up. Charts. Spreadsheets. Drop-off rates. Error reports. Brent stood near the projector, arms folded, jaw tight. The rollout has failed, he said, skipping any formalities. Our systems went live last week. 2 of our largest clients, Reynard Logistics and Carrington Retail, have both terminated their contracts as of this morning. The room froze. I saw people shift in their chairs, glance around. No one daring to speak first. He clicked through to a slide filled with red numbers. Error rates. Missed KPIs. Back-end load failures. This should have never made it to market in this state, he said. This is not just a product issue. This is a systems failure. A leadership failure. Then he turned toward me. And we're seeing now that the legacy, approach, slowness, redundancy, bureaucracy is what led us here. I felt every eye in that room crawl across my skin. Brent didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. I sat forward slowly, hands folded on the table. I'd like to respond to that. He paused, half smiling like I was being dramatic. Go ahead. I looked around the table. Some faces were blank. Some were tired. A few actually looked embarrassed. For him or for me, I couldn't tell. I wasn't in the room when this launch was approved, I began. My team wasn't consulted during the final integration phase. The risk assessments I submitted were dismissed. The simulation results we flagged as critical were never addressed. Brent tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I wasn't outdated. I was unheard. That line landed harder than I expected. A couple of heads lifted. I saw one of the compliance officers lean back in her chair, watching Brent carefully now. I continued, voice steady. 3 times I asked for a delay. 3 times I was told it would slow the momentum. I've led rollouts for 27 years. I know what a system looks like when it's not ready. Brent finally spoke. You were also the one who said the legacy systems were stable. But they're the ones that failed. I shook my head. No, Brent. What failed was cutting out the people who understood those systems. What failed was pretending disruption is the same thing as innovation. The room was so quiet I could hear the HVAC kicking on above us. Then someone spoke, Lena Frome, from finance. Were Gideon's warnings included in the official reports? She asked. Brent stiffened. They were informal suggestions. I opened my folder and slid a printed email onto the table. Dated. Time stamped. CC'd. Highlighted in yellow. We cannot confirm load stability at projected scale. Silence again. Then someone coughed. By the time the meeting ended, Brent looked like a man trying not to sweat. I walked back to my office without speaking to anyone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, adrenaline maybe. Rage probably. Relief definitely. At 4:12 that afternoon, I got a text from one of the junior engineers I'd mentored, Daniel Klein. You need to see this. He attached a screenshot. An internal email had leaked. A chain showing Brent pushing the team to skip QA stages to meet a press deadline. Go live or go home, he had written. It was all there, black and white, time-stamped, undeniable. Within the hour, a write-up hit TechStream, one of the industry blogs. The collapse of a culture, inside the fall of Brightwell Systems' launch. They quoted anonymous sources. They pulled public data. But the story was clear. This wasn't a technical glitch. It was a leadership failure, a moral failure, the kind that leaves scars. I sat at my desk, staring out the window as dusk rolled in. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't gloating. But I felt like the truth had finally found its voice. It had just taken too long, and too much damage, to be heard. The next morning, I didn't shower for the office. I didn't pack my laptop or check the meeting schedule or run through mental checklists of what needed fixing. I just got in my car and drove, same direction as always, but turned 2 blocks earlier. I parked outside Morning Grace just after 7:30. The street was still waking up, mail trucks humming past, pigeons bobbing along the sidewalk. Dew clung to the metal patio chairs, catching light like tiny flecks of silver. Inside, the bell over the door chimed soft as I entered. Familiar faces behind the counter, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon clinging to the air. I didn't hesitate. I ordered the usual black coffee, dark roast, no room. Nothing fancy, nothing new. The kind of drink that didn't pretend to be more than it was. I took the ceramic cup and settled into the corner booth by the window, the same one Elijah and I had shared for years. The seat creaked as I slid in. The wood was worn smooth at the edges, polished not by time, but by people who needed refuge. I pulled a notepad from my coat pocket and laid it on the table, like something sacred. I didn't think. I just began to write. Not a resignation letter, at least not the kind human resources would have preferred. No structure. No bullet points. No sweeteners. Just the truth, plain and solid like cold stone. I started with a verse I hadn't thought about in years. Micah 6 verse 8. Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. I wrote it at the top and let the ink dry a moment before continuing. Then I wrote about the kind of company we used to be. A place where mistakes were owned, not covered. Where people showed up not for applause, but because the work mattered. I wrote about integrity, not as a buzzword, but as a muscle we exercise daily, even when no one was watching. I wrote about the quiet corrosion that sets in when power is handed to those who confuse speed with wisdom. And I wrote about myself. The years I spent thinking silence was loyalty. The moments I stayed seated when I should have stood. The decisions I didn't contest because I believed someone else would. By the time I looked up, the place had filled. A few of the regulars nodded my way. I nodded back. No words passed between us. Just that unspoken recognition that settles between people who know what it's like to carry something heavy. I folded the letter in thirds and slipped it into my coat. I left a tip on the table, more than usual, and walked out without finishing my coffee. Instead of turning toward downtown, I drove the long way. Down 12th, past the old brick elementary where my daughter once brought home construction paper turkeys. Past the park where I taught her to ride a bike, where her laughter had once echoed through the trees. I needed that reminder that there was life outside corporate ladders and endless deadlines. That my worth wasn't stapled to a title or a nameplate. When I finally walked into the building, I didn't stop at my floor. I didn't say hello to the receptionist, who looked up and immediately glanced away. I didn't swipe my badge for the elevator. I took the stairs. The 10th floor boardroom was full when I entered. Brent stood at the front, sleeves rolled, projecting the same kind of confidence that only ever looks real until someone challenges it. His voice faltered when he saw me. I didn't wait for permission. I crossed the room slowly, stepped to the center of the table, and placed the folded letter right in front of him. He didn't reach for it. I looked him in the eye. You can fire me again if it makes you feel bigger. But today, I choose to leave with my name intact. The room froze. Not a breath. Not a shuffle. Brent's jaw twitched. His face flushed slightly, but he didn't speak. Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because he suddenly realized he was standing in the middle of a truth too loud to ignore. Lena Frome, our finance lead, reached for the letter. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. She didn't say a word, but her expression shifted. Her eyes, once fixed on numbers and margins, now seemed to see people again. No one applauded. No one needed to. I turned and walked out. The hallway outside felt larger than it had in years. My footsteps echoed soft along the floor. As I passed the open workspaces, a few heads lifted. Some looked away. Others met my eyes with something close to quiet solidarity, or maybe regret. Nobody spoke. I didn't expect them to. I walked past the door to my office and didn't pause. Took the back stairwell instead, Same one I used when I needed a breather during 14-hour days. The railing still had the same nick I'd never reported. The same bulb still flickered overhead. I stepped outside into the parking lot. The sun was higher now, warm on my face. I stopped, let it soak in. And I waited for the rage, for the grief, for the triumph. But none of it came. Only stillness. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. I wasn't trying to protect something that had already been taken from me. 3 days after I walked out of Brightwell Systems for the last time, my phone turned into something else entirely. Not a tool. Not a lifeline. Just a vessel for noise. Buzz after buzz. Notification after notification. I left it face down on the counter, but the vibrations kept coming, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me anymore. At first, I ignored it. I made coffee. I fed the dog. I took a shower longer than necessary. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. When I finally picked up the phone, the screen was flooded, texts, missed calls, links. And then I saw the headline that had set it all off. The collapse of a culture. How a legacy was silenced to death. I opened the article with caution. I braced myself for spin, for exaggeration, for the kind of dramatized journalism that turns everything into a villain and a victim. But it wasn't like that. It was careful, clear, and honest in a way the building I had just left never was. They didn't name names, but they didn't need to. The story painted a picture of the slow erosion of trust, of a systematic silencing of veteran voices in favor of louder, younger ones. They referenced anonymous sources, leaked emails, yes, including the one Daniel had forwarded, and threaded it all with commentary on a broader trend, replacing steady hands with visionaries more interested in headlines than humans. The piece didn't gloat. It didn't burn anyone at the stake. It just told the truth. By noon, a former marketing director messaged me. "Stocks down 9%, she wrote. The board scrambling. Another text followed from someone in client relations. 3 major accounts pulled out. They said the leadership direction feels unstable. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. I knew what they meant. That afternoon, the board called a closed-door emergency session. Brent was summoned. I wasn't. And I was glad. I didn't want to see him try to talk his way out. I didn't want to hear what he'd blame. That chapter was closed. His mess was his own now. But word travels. Around 5:40 p.m., I got a message from a name I hadn't seen on my screen since 2017, one of the old board members who never acknowledged me unless something was missing in a report. The message was brief. Brent has stepped down. Effective immediately. I just stared at it. Let the words hang there, soft and blue, in the glow of my phone screen. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't fist pump. I didn't pour a drink or call Elijah. What I felt was release. Not relief. Not closure. Just release. Like I'd finally stopped holding something that was never mine to carry. At 9:03 p.m., Elijah did text me. Just one line. They called it justice. But to you, it was simply closure. I read it twice. He knew me well. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table. The house still quiet, the sun sneaking through the blinds. My hands wrapped around a chipped mug, one my daughter made in 5th grade with a handle that never sat quite right. Coffee had gone lukewarm, but I hadn't touched it. I was staring at the subject line of a new email. "We'd like to talk, Fairlight Group." I open it, expecting a recruiter's template. But this wasn't that. It was from a partner at the firm. Someone real. Someone who knew the kind of week I'd had. "We've followed your work for years. Your name came up again recently for the right reasons. We're building something here that values experience as much as innovation. We don't just want what you know, we want the way you think and the way you lead. Let's talk." No sugarcoating. No dangling perks. Just respect, offered plainly. The offer with all the details, equity, oversight, vision, came later. But honestly, that first message held more weight than any contract could. I didn't reply immediately. Not because I had doubts, but because I needed to pause. I needed to let the moment settle. I didn't want to run into something new just because I was trying to outrun what I left. So I went for a walk. No headphones. No direction. Just past the old trees that arched over Elm Street, past the houses with wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze. The air smelled like lawn clippings in spring. Dogs barked behind fences, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed low and steady. I passed the walking trail and stopped at a bench I hadn't touched in years. Same grainy wood, same rusted plaque on the side. An older man was down in the field, tossing a baseball underhand to a boy maybe 6 or 7. The ball rolled away, and they laughed, not at the mistake, but at the moment. It made me think. Maybe starting over isn't always a declaration. Maybe it's just learning how to be gentle with yourself again. We think healing is loud, that it comes with spotlights and standing ovations. But maybe healing is quieter, like knowing you don't have to defend the truth just because others ignored it. That evening, I finally replied, "Thank you for seeing what others overlooked. I'm ready to talk." No resume attached. No puffed-up pitch. Just a man who had finally remembered who he was, without the noise, without the badge, without the building. Later that night, I sat by the window as the last of the light slipped away. I thought about the years I'd spent believing that if I stayed quiet long enough, loyal long enough, steady long enough, someone would notice. Turns out, someone did. I didn't need revenge. I got restored. 3 months later, I found myself in a different kind of boardroom. Same long table, same whiteboards, same charts on the wall. But everything felt lighter here. No one trying to outshine the next. No tension under the surface. Just work that mattered and people who respected what it took to build things right. Fairlight Group wasn't flashy. It didn't have the buzz or the billion-dollar valuation. But what it had was rare substance. They didn't hire me because I was a headline. They brought me in because they saw something steady in me. That's what they called me now, the steady anchor. Not a title, not a nameplate. Just a role I didn't have to audition for. In our weekly strategy meeting, one of the younger team leads turned to me after I offered a few quiet notes on risk assessment. "What made you stay so long at your last company?" she asked, not rudely. Just genuinely curious. I smiled, slow, honest. I thought loyalty was enough, until I learned respect was just as vital. She nodded, then jotted something down in her notebook. I didn't ask what. That evening, after work, I stopped by the corner store for milk and saw a headline on a magazine near the register. The last of the Brent saga had made print. It wasn't vindictive. No flames, no scandal-laced expose. Just a quiet piece in a business column titled, "When Legacy Isn't Enough, The Fall of a Founder's Son." One line stood out and stayed with me. There's ambition, and then there's wisdom. When you trade one for the other, you lose both. I didn't buy the magazine. I didn't need to. Back home, I sat in the den, windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of cut grass and warm pavement. The house was still. No kids running through, no buzzing phone, no pressing deadlines. Just the ticking of the old wall clock I'd meant to replace for years. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and drove across town. The church was just as I'd left it, modest, brick and wood, nestled between 2 overgrown oaks. I parked, walked up the steps, and slipped inside. The sanctuary was empty. Lights dimmed, air cool and quiet. I sat in that same back pew, the one where I'd first started asking questions I didn't want to hear answers to. I didn't speak out loud, didn't kneel, didn't ask for anything. I just sat. Sunlight poured through the stained glass window, casting soft reds and golds across the floor in front of me. The dust floated through it like tiny dancers, unhurried. For a moment, I just breathed. I didn't feel lost anymore. I didn't feel like something taken had to be earned back. I felt settled. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened a blank page. I didn't know why, exactly. Maybe I just needed to write something to close the loop. What came out surprised me. I wasn't broken. I was removed from where I no longer belonged. God doesn't always protect you from a fire. Sometimes He walks with you through it, so you can come out not burned, but refined. I read it over twice. Didn't change a word. Because, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to be profound. I was just being honest. I didn't need a grand ending. I didn't need revenge or some cinematic closure. I had something better. I had my voice back. I had my name. And I had peace. I walked away. But I'm still here, still in the work I do now, in the people I mentor, in every person who finally decides they've had enough of being merely tolerated. I didn't disappear. I remained. In every room where someone chooses dignity over silence. I'm still there. Before we end this story, I just want to leave you with a quiet thought. Sometimes, walking away isn't about giving up. It's about honoring the part of you that stayed silent for too long. Maybe you've been there too, holding on because it felt safer than starting over. If so, I hope you know you're not alone. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful to have you with me for the next one.